This happened during my early 20s. I used to live in a small home with a group of 3 other guys. We all didn't really know each other before moving in together, but we had gone to the same college and graduated at the same time. So with all of us looking for somewhere to live afterward, it all just kind of fell into place. Splitting the rent 4 ways, we were able to afford a relatively small house on the more rural outskirts of the city. Everything closer was a bit too expensive. All went well for the first 9-ish months, but pretty suddenly, 2 of the guys decided to move out, leaving just me and KJ. Unfortunately, KJ was the only one of the 3 that I didn't really talk to that much. He was always working, or getting home late, or just not wanting to hang out with the rest of us, so it kinda sucked that it was the other 2 that left. It also meant we had to pay double between each of us. This wasn't something we could keep up, and agreed that at the end of the lease in 3 months, we would go our separate ways and leave the house. For the first month after the 2 left, it became really apparent how absent KJ was. On my days off, I was often at home just chilling all day and night by myself, which was very different from when the other 2 lived here. I didn't care too much. If anything, it was great having the place all alone, but I did think it was odd he was out for so long all the time. He only worked part-time in the mornings, but I figured he must have been out with friends all night every night. However, one night I happened to stay up a little later than usual. I was sitting in my room, and it was maybe about 1 a.m. when I saw headlights shine through my window, pulling down the gravel driveway. When I heard the front door open, I got up and for some reason felt like saying hi, just to keep things from getting too distant and awkward between us. I opened my bedroom door, but was kind of startled as I heard his footsteps begin rushing down the hallway. When I stuck my head out, he jumped, like I'd caught him in the act of something. The lights were off in the hallway, so I couldn't see him too well, but I could see that his eyes were wide and his body was frozen just outside of his bedroom door. "What's up, KJ? Just seeing how you're doing," I said to break the silence. The way he just stood there in the dark hallway with his wide open eyes and looked at me was kind of chilling. "I'm good." There were another few seconds of silence before I just nodded and stepped back into my room. Well, that definitely didn't help make things any less awkward between us. Why was he acting so strange, hurrying to his room and all? I didn't want to be nosy, but it kinda had me concerned. After a couple minutes, I opened my door carefully and quietly walked down the hallway. I just wanted to listen for a second as I passed by his room, and nothing more. But when I did, I heard him moving around frantically, like he was opening and closing drawers chaotically. It was so odd that I stopped walking for a second and leaned a bit closer to his door. The chaos continued, making me feel really uneasy, until it suddenly went quiet. Everything stopped, like he just froze. As the seconds started to go by, I got increasingly more uneasy and wanted to get out of that hallway. But before I could even move, the door suddenly swung open. KJ stood in the doorway with the same wide open eyes as before, staring right at me. In an effort to cover for myself, I said I was just heading to the kitchen and asked if he wanted anything. KJ quietly muttered no, then closed the door on me. It was honestly really creepy and only made me feel more like something was going on with him. I went into the kitchen to follow through with what I said, then went back to my room. He was quiet for the rest of the night. For the next probably 5 or 6 days, I found myself more attentive to what KJ was up to. I'd stay up until he got home, always feeling too uncomfortable to sleep until I knew he was in his room and up to nothing. During those days, he remained in that disturbing, almost zombie-like state that he was in that one night. His eyes grew increasingly more restless every day, and he spoke no more than a couple words, always hurrying into his room. Until one night after he got home, and as I was in bed trying to sleep, a knock came from the other side of my door. It scared me. I never heard him walk down the hallway to my room. I got up and opened the door. He had that same look with restless eyes, but had a partial smile as well. He mentioned that he just got home and thought he dropped his wallet somewhere out in the driveway as he was walking up to the door, asking if I had a flashlight and would help him find it real quick. I found it strange, like he'd never asked anyone for help before, or really to do anything with him. Although I thought it was odd and I was tired, I thought maybe this was a chance to make things better, so I grabbed a flashlight and followed him out to the driveway. He started up some small talk, just asking about work and stuff, as we started walking on the gravel and looking around. I noticed almost right away that his car was parked really far down the driveway though, like all the way at the end, for seemingly no reason. So if he walked all this way, we had to do the same to look for his wallet. We got all the way down to his car, and I never spotted anything on the ground, but then he started leading me away from the car. I was still shining the light around, but realizing there was no reason his wallet should be way out here away from the driveway, I asked what we were doing. KJ took a few seconds to respond, like he was thinking, before saying he went for a short walk out here earlier, so he could have dropped it. But I didn't really believe him. He kept trying to lead me further from the driveway and deeper into the woods. Every time I said we should turn back, he would repeatedly try to convince me otherwise. It got really suspicious really fast. I felt my nerves building up. "Here, you could take the flashlight. I'm gonna head back to the house. I gotta be up early for work tomorrow anyway," I said as I tried to hand over the flashlight to him and make my exit. He didn't take it though. His clearly fake smile faded, and his restless eyes looked more than disappointed. He looked angry. He didn't respond, but the tension was making me really uneasy. After a few seconds, I turned around and started quickly walking away from the woods. I looked back a couple times, seeing KJ just standing there and watching me. As soon as I got to the house, I started packing. I didn't know what that was, but I didn't feel safe with him at all. I didn't sleep the whole night, listening to make sure KJ wasn't up to anything else. But he never came back to the house that night. In the morning, I got everything important stashed into my car and left. Even years later, I never heard anything from KJ or figured out what was going on. His behavior wasn't normal, and I honestly think he was planning to do something horrible in the woods that night. For 2 years, I lived with my college roommate, Jason, in a small house near the campus we used to go to. Despite having been roommates at college for a year before this, we still weren't the closest of friends or anything. We just both had similar plans for after college, so moving in together made sense for the time being. The first year or so went really well. We got a lot closer and enjoyed living together enough to renew the lease for another year. This happened in June, 2 months after renewing the lease. After a normal late night at work, I got home and talked to Jason for a while. Then we both called it a night and went to bed. However, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the floorboards creaking in the hallway. They were walking slowly, going toward the main area of the house. I rolled over and looked at the clock, seeing it was 3 a.m. I thought Jason was just getting some water or something. I don't know. At the moment, I didn't care either, and just went back to sleep. In the morning, I had to go to work early, so I was kind of rushing to leave, but Jason opened his door, looking tired, and asked me something I wasn't expecting. He asked what I was doing walking around the house in the middle of the night. I was immediately taken aback. I said I wasn't, but had thought I heard him walking around. The conversation basically ended at that though, with both of us confused at what we both heard, because I had to leave for work. Honestly, I thought our floors or walls must have just been creaking from the wind hitting the house or something, if it really wasn't Jason. When I got back home, Jason was at work, so I spent most of the night just chilling in my room, and eventually, around the same time as last night, I went to bed. But then again, I woke up around the same time to the floorboards making that same creaking sound. This time, rather than going right back to sleep, I tried to listen more carefully. It sounded exactly like someone slowly walking through the hallway and into the living room. Once they got to the other side of the house, I couldn't hear anything for about 30 seconds and decided to get up and check on it. I opened my door and walked down to the living room, but Jason wasn't in there. As far as I could tell, there was nothing there that could explain what I heard. I went back to my room and went to sleep. What I found so strange about it was that the sound moved through the house. Like if it was just the home creaking, why did it slowly go across the house like that? I mentioned it to Jason in the morning, and neither of us could come up with any ideas. Jason was off this day, but at 2 I had to go to work. I didn't make it back to the house until nearly 11. When I did and walked down the hallway to my room, I was surprised to see Jason still up. I just saw him in the corner of my eye, sitting on the bed in his room as I passed by the doorway. I called out "What's up" as I went over to my room, but Jason didn't respond. I thought it was kinda weird, but maybe he just didn't hear me, so I continued into my room. I took off my work uniform and put on some regular clothes. I left my room to go to the kitchen and get some food, but I noticed Jason's light was off in his room now. When I passed by, I looked in just to see if he was good. He was still sitting on his bed in the corner, now just in the dark, so I could barely see him. "Hey, what's up, Jason? You alright?" I called out. After a few seconds of him not responding, I just left the doorway and went to the kitchen. This was definitely weird, but I didn't know what else to do. Obviously, I wasn't going to just march into his room for no reason, just so he'd respond to me. But it did seem really odd he didn't at least just say hi or whatever. I was in the kitchen for maybe 15 minutes, then headed back to my room. Jason's door was closed when I passed by. For a whole hour, I stayed in my room, but then I heard that sound. The floorboards creaking right in the hallway. I looked over, and suddenly something moved under the door. I listened to the creaking continue, but with my last couple interactions with Jason being weird, I figured I would just text him this time to ask if it was him walking around. I waited a couple minutes, then I finally got a response. Jason sent me a question mark, then followed up with, "What do you mean? I'm not home right now." My face went pale, and my eyes shot over to the door. I got up and hurried into the hallway. No one was there, but the door to Jason's room was now open again. I quietly stood there and listened, but didn't hear anything. I walked over and peered through the doorway. Standing in the center of the pitch-black room was an unknown man. Even in the dark, now that he was closer and standing up facing me, I could tell he was taller and had a thick beard, two distinct features different from Jason that I couldn't see before. Without any more hesitation, I ran out of the house. I called the police immediately, standing on the other side of the road. When they got there, whoever that guy was gone. Strangely, there were no signs of where he entered or exited the house from, aside from a window that was partially unlocked, but it didn't seem to have been opened recently. What's really disturbing is knowing that he was likely the cause of the creaking floorboards for the last several days in the middle of the night, meaning he was inside walking around the house while we were sleeping. Even more creepy is trying to figure out why he was in Jason's room, just sitting on his bed and seemingly waiting for something. Interestingly, in the last few days, that was the one day that Jason had off and that I worked, meaning Jason would be alone pretty much all evening. This makes me think the unknown man somehow knew this and was waiting to catch Jason off guard while he was alone. This would explain why the man was in Jason's room waiting, and why he didn't do anything to me. But fortunately, Jason happened to go hang out with a friend for most of the night. Whatever the case, we probably won't ever know the man's true intentions unless it's too late. In 2015, when I was 23, I had used Craigslist to find a roommate to share my apartment with. Back then, I think it was pretty normal to be using Craigslist for finding roommates and whatnot. There weren't really any other sites to do so on, and it wasn't exploited as much as it is today. I posted a listing with some pictures of my place and made sure to specify that I was looking for a roommate preferably close to my age. After only a few days, I got a response from a woman named Hannah. She said she was also 23 and still in college, and from everything we talked about on the phone, she seemed pretty similar to me and like we might actually make good roommates. So I scheduled to have her stop by and tour the place. When she did, everything seemed great. Hannah liked the place, and we agreed on a price, and within a week she had moved in with me. I will say, I did notice that she didn't quite look her age. She was a bit taller than me, and just had a more mature, older look to her. I figured it was nothing though, that she just happened to look a bit older than her age. Anyway, the first few days went by, and we didn't really have much time to get comfortable with each other yet, as I had work and she had college and work as well. It was the 5th day after she'd moved in that I got home from work and entered the apartment around 10 p.m. As soon as I opened the door, I heard footsteps rushing through the hallway and then a door slamming closed. Confused, I dropped my bag down and went over to look down the hallway that led to both of our bedrooms. Their door was closed and the light was on in their room, but my door was open. I knew I'd closed it before leaving, so I thought that was pretty weird. I definitely wasn't comfortable with them snooping around my room, if that's what they were doing. I went in and closed the door behind me. After checking around, nothing looked out of place or like it'd been looked through, so I figured it was nothing and just went on with my night. I settled in and watched TV for a bit in my room. I didn't hear Hannah in her room at all for a whole hour, so I thought she was probably just sleeping. She'd mentioned before that she liked to go to bed early. However, while watching TV, I happened to glance at my bedroom door just out of habit, but I noticed something weird. There was a shadow under the crack in the doorway. She was standing behind my door. She wasn't moving. How long had she been standing there for? Hannah? They still didn't move. I called out again. Hannah, are you out there? Several quiet seconds passed until the shadow slowly moved, leaving from behind the door and walking down the hallway. I heard her bedroom door slam shut behind her. That got my heart pumping for a moment. What was she doing? I locked my door after that and stayed up just a bit later than usual, but eventually went to bed. In the morning, I passed by Hannah in the kitchen and kindly brought up last night, just asking if she needed something. She smiled and said everything was good, ending the conversation right there. It was odd for sure, but I just moved on, not wanting to make things bad between us so soon into her moving in. Hannah left soon after, and a few hours later I went to work. I got home around the same time as last night, about 10:30, walking into a quiet and dark apartment. All the lights were off, even in her room, so I assumed she had already gone to bed. I quietly walked into my bedroom and closed the door, trying not to wake her. After a short FaceTime with one of my friends, I got in the shower to wind down for the night, planning to go to bed right after. While I was in there, I could have sworn I heard something from outside my room. I even lowered the water pressure for a second to listen, but not hearing anything else, I continued my shower as usual. Once I was done, I got out and dried off, but when I looked out the doorway into my room, the door to the hallway was open. I quickly got dressed and looked into the hallway. All the lights were still off, and Hannah wasn't making any noise in her room. I was honestly creeped out now. I closed the door and locked it. What's really odd is that I was almost sure that I'd unconsciously locked the door when I got home and went into my room. Obviously now, I assumed I'd just forgotten to, but definitely wasn't going to forget anymore. But why did she even open my door in the first place? Did she even open my door? The whole place was still dark and quiet, as if she never left her room and was just sleeping. What the hell was going on? I stayed up for another hour, trying to watch TV and calm down, but still pretty shaken by what was happening. I just didn't know Hannah enough to really understand any of this, or know what to do. I kept trying to convince myself it was something harmless, like she tried to come in to ask me something, but saw I was in the shower and just left. But that still doesn't explain any of the other things that have happened. After that hour, I knew I had to get some sleep, so I shut everything off, crawled into my bed, and closed my eyes. It felt as though as soon as I closed my eyes, I opened them back up, knowing that I'd fallen asleep, but only for a short amount of time. Unsure why I'd woken up, I rolled over and looked around. The room was pitch black, and the apartment was quiet. Not even any noise from the neighbors, just the silent creaking of the old building. But through the dark, I could tell that the door to my room was cracked open. Maybe just a few inches, but that didn't change how instantly terrifying it was. I knew without a doubt I'd locked it this time, and even creepier, I never heard it open. "Hannah?" I called out in a soft voice. The silence of the place almost felt like it was getting louder, making me more nervous as the seconds passed. I sat up. I was just staring at the crack in the door, focused on the darkness between it, feeling like someone was watching me through it. But as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I looked around the room again. In the corner, I could see her figure standing near my wardrobe. She didn't move or speak, just faced me and stood in the dark. As each second passed, I felt my heart beating faster and faster, until she suddenly took a step forward. I still couldn't really see her well, but I could make out the general outline of her face, and she had this blank, dead stare, like she was looking through me. She took another step, then suddenly ran across the room and into the hallway. A second later, I heard her bedroom door slam shut. After a moment, I grabbed my phone and car keys, then sprinted to the front door and exited the building. I know she technically did nothing to me, but I was absolutely horrified. I didn't even want to stay in the parking lot, worried she'd run out looking for me. I drove to a nearby neighborhood and parked, then called the police, hoping to figure out what was going on with the safety of officers around. It took about 15 minutes for the police to make it to the apartment. By then, Hannah was gone, took most of her belongings and just vanished. It was then, as we tried to contact her and figure out who she was, that we realized all the information I had on her was fabricated. Even her name didn't match up, and her phone number was for a prepaid burner phone. It had no name or identity attached to it. Like I said, this was in 2015, so even a decade later, I've never heard from or seen her again, which makes me think she likely had some really disturbing intentions had I stayed roommates with her any longer. There's a lot of questions, and basically no answers. After that, I moved apartments, worried that the woman might come back when I least expect it. It was mid-2018. I was 23 and had driven down to Vermont to see my family and hang out for a few weeks. While there, I also wanted to go camping since my parents' house was just outside of the Appalachian Mountains. When I used to live with them still, I'd go out all the time, but since I moved out, I hadn't had the chance to go out camping or even hiking at all. There was one place specifically that I'd had on my mind for a while. Just before I moved, I found a trail on a forum for people exploring abandoned structures, and I'd been wanting to check it out ever since. This trail supposedly led to an old lodge just right in the middle of the forest. So, on a Monday morning, I drove out there. I parked on the side of the road, and the trail was not marked or anything. This was clearly just some rough path made by random people like me wanting to explore the abandoned lodge. It was very overgrown though, so it looked like nobody had been down there in a while. The hike there took just under 2 hours, and while it was mostly flat, it was a pretty difficult walk because of all the weeds and bushes growing into the path. But regardless, I made it. Now, my plan was to camp inside the lodge, because why not, but I came prepared with a tent and everything, in case it was completely destroyed or something. Good thing I did, because it was clear from the outside that it definitely wasn't safe to camp in. Most of the roof was gone, caving into itself, and the logs it was made of were full of thick vines and mold. The door was wide open though, so I peeked my head inside and looked around. It smelled awful, and with all the decayed and destroyed parts everywhere, there wasn't much access to anything that I could look around. There was a door on the far end of the main hallway that looked intact, and I was trying to get to, but it was a bit too sketchy to get there, so I ended up just backing out. From there, I didn't have anything else planned, but with the sun already starting to set, I began looking around for a good place to set up camp. There really weren't many options, so I basically just walked 200 feet out from the lodge and cleared a small spot to put my tent. As the sun set, the darkness slowly covered the lodge in the distance until I could no longer see it, and all the forest sounds slowly turned into crickets and the warm crackle of the small campfire I built. I really wanted to stargaze, but the spot I was in had trees towering over me, blocking most of the view. Plus, it was partially cloudy. So I just sat there, throwing sticks into the fire and thinking about whatever came to mind. Until I heard something. I don't really know how to describe it, but it was pretty loud, maybe like wood bowing or bending. And even though I couldn't see the lodge anymore, the sound came from right where I knew the lodge was sitting in the dark. It only lasted a few seconds, but it sent chills through me. Maybe it was just the old wood bending and creaking in the wind, or maybe it was something else. I sat and listened for a while, like 30 minutes, without hearing anything else. It was only an hour or so into the night, but I knew if I didn't check on it now, I wouldn't be able to sleep later. So I figured I might as well go look around while it was still early into the night. I fueled up my campfire with some more sticks before leaving, so I wouldn't have to rebuild it. Then I grabbed my small LED lamp and walked in the direction of the lodge. After only a minute of walking, the structure faintly showed up in the light. It was as creepy as expected. I walked up to it cautiously, passing by a couple destroyed windows and holding the light up. Inside, it was extremely dark. Even with the light, it felt like I could barely see anything. When I got to the door, I was startled for a moment. It was closed. I'd been here less than 2 hours ago and left it wide open. Then I noticed something else. There were scratches, like from nails or maybe a knife, all along the front face of the door. I didn't notice them last time, so I wasn't sure if they were already there or had just happened and were maybe the sound I heard. I debated for a second whether or not I even wanted to try opening it, or if I should just leave. But it was all for nothing, because when I eventually decided to open it, I couldn't. It felt like something was holding it shut from the other side. I got really unsettled and didn't stay any longer. I backed away from the lodge and rushed back into the woods toward my campsite. However, I immediately noticed something was wrong. Aside from my lantern, there was no light coming from the forest. I started to hurry, hoping I was still going in the right direction. Luckily I was, and a minute later I made it back to my tent. A column of smoke filled the air above what was my campfire, as if someone had just abruptly put it out while it was still burning. I looked around, just standing there holding my lantern up, barely able to see anything in the trees. "Hello? Hello? Who's out there?" Nobody responded. Starting to feel chills run through me again. I knew it was only a 2-hour hike back to where my car was, so I quickly decided to pack and head out. I took down my tent, and as I shoved the few remaining things into my backpack, I heard something nearby. I stopped for a second and held up my lantern, but still saw nothing. It sounded like someone was laughing. It was quiet, and not like someone laughing with their friends or anything. It was a single person, softly laughing under their breath as they watched me from behind the trees in the dark, like they were insane. I hurried up, leaving scraps behind and booking it to the trail. With my crappy lantern, it was really hard to follow the path, but I did the best I could. Several times I stopped, thinking I heard that soft laughing and worried I was being followed. But whoever it was stalking me out there, they were blending in with the dark perfectly, as I never once even caught sight of them. I got back to the road, getting in my car and driving away. I look back at that experience 7 years later as the single most disturbing and horrifying experience of my life. I don't think anyone can truly understand the feeling of helplessness I felt being out there in the forest in the middle of nowhere at night and stalked by some insane person. Maybe they set up home in that abandoned lodge. I really don't know. But from everything I saw and experienced there, I don't think anyone should go back to find out. I was hiking to a fairly well-known overlook just outside of Glacier National Park in Montana. It definitely wasn't as great as any of the views within Glacier National Park, but it was just a normal trail with no rules or anything. Also, it was just before winter, which around here is off-season for most hiking and camping, which meant nobody would be out. I didn't mind the cold, so it was nice to have the trail and the overlook to myself. I finished hiking up there at just about 5:30, so it took nearly 6 hours. Pretty much, there was this large grassy opening on top of the mountain with a couple stone circles for making campfires and setting up camp around, and a little further up was a stone cliff that provided a view of the whole valley of mountains and forest. You could actually probably see Glacier National Park from there on a good clear day. Anyway, as expected, nobody else was at the campsite or at the overlook. I set up all my stuff by the stone circle closest to the overlook and made myself a quick dinner, then went to sit on the edge of the cliff to watch the sunset. I will say there was a bit of a drop below the overlook, which was kind of daunting at first, but the sun setting over the mountains made me completely forget about it. I sat there and watched it for a whole 30 minutes, until it passed the horizon and got dark outside. Feeling good, I got up and turned to walk back to my campsite, but almost jumped back when I saw a man standing right behind me in the bushes near the edge of the forest. He was looking right at me, but what made it really creepy was as soon as I saw him, he just turned around and left right away. I couldn't see much of him since it was pretty dark out, and he was in the bushes, but the man had no backpack on, so I thought he must have gotten to the campsite just after me and set up his stuff already. From where I was on the overlook, I could really only see my setup and none of the other parts of the campsite. But when I got closer, I still didn't see anything else, and the way the guy went into the forest was not in the direction of the campsite either. I thought it was really weird, but went on with my night. I put some dry sticks into the stone circle and lit up a campfire, then set up my mini camping chair and sat by the fire. I didn't have much else to do that night. I honestly had no plan for this trip. I just wanted to come out here and relax all day and night and enjoy the forest. So that's what I tried to do. Several hours went by. I think it was getting to be around 11 p.m. when I heard footsteps somewhere in front of me. Of course, I couldn't see anything, but it sounded eerily like human footsteps, one after the other, not too far away in the woods. Pretty soon after hearing them, I called out, asking if someone was out there. The footsteps stopped for a moment, like they hesitated, and then began walking again. But whatever it was out there, they didn't respond. Even though it sounded exactly like human footsteps, without being able to see them, and without them responding, I had to believe that it was just an animal, like maybe a deer or something. Because if it was a person, surely they'd respond, but also it made no sense for anyone to be walking around right now. Eventually, the steps faded out though. Another hour went by as I sat by the campfire. I didn't think the footsteps had me too nervous or scared, but they must have, because I was still very awake, like definitely not able to sleep, even though it was past midnight already. After a while, I knew I wasn't going to bed anytime soon, and I was getting bored, so I walked out to the overlook to see if maybe the stars were out. I left the fire going and got up, walking over to the cliff. The skies weren't too clear, however, the moon was shining down enough to cast a glowing light over the mountains and forest. The breeze was calming and quiet, moving across the valley. I stood there for maybe a minute, before suddenly multiple sticks snapped behind me and a bush aggressively rustled. I spun around, seeing that same man from earlier, but he didn't turn away this time. He moved through the bush and started quickly walking up to the overlook. I began asking what he was doing out here, but the guy just talked over me, holding this disturbing fake smile as he kept moving closer, saying random nonsense and keeping from answering any of my questions, or even acknowledging anything that I said. The way he was coming at me was terrifying, and I tried to move to the side, but he was quick to get back in front of me. And suddenly, in the heat of the moment, I realized what was about to happen. He put his hands out and lunged at me, trying to push me over the ledge. Thank God I was prepared for it and had a stable footing, and I was a bit bigger than the guy, so I shoved him back and moved away from the cliff. As he stumbled, I tried to run back to the campsite, but he caught up pretty quick. This time, he didn't try to hide his intent. His face was horrifyingly angry and full of rage. I can't even imagine how lucky I was that this guy didn't have any form of weapon on him, because he definitely wouldn't have hesitated to use it. We wrangled around for maybe 30 seconds, but I kept getting the better of him. The guy was pretty skinny, like he hadn't eaten in a while, but he was just dead set on taking me down. After a few attempts though, he was finally beaten enough to run away. I didn't even try chasing or keeping him pinned. Way out here, it just wasn't worth the risk. I got everything together, put on my headlamp, and left the campsite. I made it about 2 hours back down the trail before my headlamp's batteries ran out, so I set up a mini camp in the woods and waited for sunrise, then finished the hike back. I put a report in and talked to a lot of people about my encounter, but everyone has different thoughts as to what the man was really doing out there. All I know is I could have lost my life that night had I been any less careful. This was last year in the summer. I was out on a trail backpacking to a small camping spot with my dog Rocky. He's an Australian Shepherd, so a medium-sized, really smart dog that comes with me everywhere I go, always loving running around and hiking through the woods. This place we were headed to was one I'd been to 3 or 4 times before. I loved it because it was isolated and never had anyone else, so Rocky could be free to run around off-leash and enjoy himself. The campsite was 8 hours down trail, so by the time we got there, it was just an hour or two before sunset. The campsite itself wasn't anything special or picturesque. It was just a small opening with nothing but trees all around. I found it calming and nice to hang out in, and safe for me to let Rocky roam around while still being able to keep an eye on him. I tossed my pack down and started to set everything up, which is when Rocky usually does his little patrol around the campsite. I saw him sniffing around and go a little ways into the woods, while I continued to put our tent up, then unpacked the rest of the things into the inside of the tent. About 15 minutes after arriving, Rocky came back to the campsite, but he was acting strange. His tail was down, and he came right up to me, then turned and faced the direction he just came from, looking out into the woods. I almost never see him act like this, unless there was a thunderstorm or something he was afraid of. I stood up and looked out where he came from, but saw nothing. I then checked him, making sure he didn't step on something and hurt himself, but he was completely fine, just anxious for some reason. It was pretty off-putting, especially from a smart and capable dog like Rocky was. I kept on the lookout as I finished setting up the camp and getting the campfire built. As I did, Rocky never left my side, not to explore or anything, just followed me around and kept his eyes on the woods. I will say, every time I looked back to check the woods, I felt a strange, uneasy sense, like I was being watched. I put it off as Rocky just making me nervous, since I didn't actually see anything, but it never really left my mind. I got the campfire going just as the sun fell past the top of the trees, covering the woods in a dark shadow. It was quiet, as it always was, but I didn't feel as calm as I usually did. I figured I wouldn't though, because of Rocky's unusual behavior, but hoped tomorrow things would be more normal and we could go back to enjoying our time. For the night though, I just tended the fire and hung out with Rocky beside me, listening to the sounds of the forest. But then, just about an hour past sunset, Rocky suddenly perked his head up and froze. He stared anxiously out at the trees, ears up and tail between his legs. I looked out, but the darkness engulfed the area, making anything past 20 or 30 feet completely concealed. He started quietly whining, locking his gaze at the darkness behind the trees. Trusting him that something was wrong, I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it out there. Not seeing much, I started to walk a little further in. Rocky followed closely behind me. I didn't want to venture too far away from the campfire, but from the maybe 50 feet I walked out, I saw nothing in the woods. We went back and sat down. Even though I didn't see anything, I knew Rocky wouldn't be doing this for no reason. But it seemed most likely, and I guess I just hoped, that it was just an animal of some kind, walking around the area. We weren't in bear territory, but I still carried bear spray on me, which would work on any animal, so I wasn't too worried for our safety. Rocky stayed on high alert all night, but didn't have any more sudden moments, and a couple hours later, we got in the tent and went to bed. I could tell Rocky was tired, probably from all the anxiety he was going through, and I was glad to see him close his eyes and fall asleep within 15 minutes. I did the same soon after. This might sound strange, but during that night, I remember having a dream about walking through the woods at night. I was alone, Rocky wasn't with me, and I was just walking through the trees, not on a path or anything. In the middle of that dream, I started to hear a high-pitched noise. Over and over, it kept going, until suddenly I shot awake. Rocky was nudging my face with his snout and whining in my ear, making that high-pitched noise I was hearing in my dream, immediately making me realize that he'd been trying to wake me for a while. I sat up and grabbed my flashlight, feeling the nerves as I unzipped the tent and stepped out to look around. I turned on the flashlight, prepared to scan the area, but immediately when the light came on, it lit up a person right in front of me, like maybe 10 feet away from the tent. They had all black clothes on, with a hoodie draping over half of their face, only showing their distressed beard. I quickly noticed a reflection coming from his hand though, seeing the small blade of a pocket knife shining the light back at me. In that instant, I just froze up, like my whole body went through a sudden shock. The man froze for a moment too, but then started to step forward again when Rocky began growling. Up until then, I hadn't even noticed that he'd come out of the tent and was standing right next to me. This made the man hesitate, giving me more time to collect myself and quickly reach into the tent for the bear spray. By the time I was back up, Rocky was aggressively barking and moving back and forth, putting himself between us. The man didn't take any more steps forward and just turned and ran into the woods. Thankfully, Rocky didn't chase after him. I started taking everything down and packing as he kept his head up and circled around the campsite, guarding the whole area. Once packed, we started back down the trail. Honestly, even with my adrenaline still flowing through the entire hike back, I wasn't all that scared, knowing how well Rocky handled the situation. We made it back safely and got out of there. I did what I could to report the incident, but I think because of the location and everything, it wasn't really investigated. Anyway, I've gone on several camping trips since then, and Rocky was back to his normal self, happy and exploring the forests as usual. At least now I know that if he doesn't trust something, it's best to just get out of there. This was a little under 2 years ago. Back then, I lived in a small 2-story townhouse and worked remotely from home. The place had a small kitchen and living room on the first floor and 2 bedrooms on the second floor. One of those rooms I used as my office. During this time, the unit connected to mine that I shared a wall with was vacant. Nobody lived there or had moved in over 3 months. This night, I was working pretty late. It was rainy and cloudy outside, so I didn't have much else to do and decided to use the extra time to get ahead on work stuff. I sat in the office on my laptop for a good few hours. The house was quiet as usual, with the soft sounds of the rain outside ticking against the roof. I think it was just about 8 p.m. when, between the quiet clicking of my keyboard, I heard a thump on the wall next to me. I looked over, sort of confused, and heard it again. This was on the shared wall with the vacant unit, so naturally, it was kind of odd. After a few seconds of thinking, I thought that it must have been the owner checking up on something, or maybe prepping the unit for a tour in the morning. Regardless, I continued working. Over the course of the next hour or so, I heard random sounds from the other units. Creaks, thumps, and various other similar sounds. Oddly, they were spread out. Like I'd hear one creak, then several minutes would pass before I'd hear anything else. But then, at just about 9:30, I heard a door suddenly creak open and then pushed closed. This was louder than all the other sounds that I'd been hearing throughout the night, which made me feel kind of uneasy. It'd been months since I'd heard the sound of the other unit's door open and close, so I didn't actually know how loud or quiet it usually was. After a minute, I decided to take a break and leave the office, heading downstairs just to make sure everything was good with the other unit. I looked out the window next to the front door, seeing if maybe the owner's car was out there, but I didn't see anything. Nothing parked on the driveway or on the road. Also, while down there, I didn't hear a single noise from the other unit. I figured whoever it was must have already left, and so hopefully all the strange noises were done for the night. After checking out the door and double-checking it was locked, I went right back upstairs to my office. I wasn't sure how much longer I really wanted to work for. At this point, I was feeling pretty tired and kinda just wanted to chill in bed for the rest of the night. But I told myself I'd do 30 more minutes. I closed the door to my office, sat down at my desk, and got as much done as I could. During that half hour, I never noticed any more of those sounds coming from the vacant unit. Just the calm rain still trickling down outside. Finally feeling good about the work I'd gotten done, and feeling my eyelids getting heavy, I shut off my laptop and headed out of the office, turning off the hallway lights and going into my bedroom. I started getting myself ready for bed when a sudden, eerie, and ominous sound echoed through the walls of the house. Someone was whistling a slow, soft tune. I stood there, silently listening for a few moments, I guess in shock of what I was hearing and how out of nowhere it came from. I quietly walked up to my bedroom door and cracked it open. As soon as I did, I could hear it much more clearly. It felt like it was too loud to be from the other unit, or even outside. Feeling really unsettled, I started walking down the hallway as the whistling persisted, filling the quiet halls of the house with the eerie tune. I made my way down the steps and moved toward the back of the house, where I could clearly hear the sound coming from. I peered around the corner into the living room. In the dark, unlit room, a man was sitting in the chair, facing the other way toward the black TV screen, continuing to whistle as he stared into the pitch-black room and barely moved. I could only see the general outline of him, but his hand that was on the armrest looked like it had something in it, like a small handgun. I knew he had to have known I was inside and probably heard me sneaking downstairs, yet he never looked back. He just stared forward, whistling. It was incredibly disturbing. I didn't know whether to say something or try to sneak away. Why was he even here? How did he even get in? What did he want? My heart was beating faster and faster before I made the sudden decision to run out of the house. I swung open the front door, still hearing the man continue whistling as I ran away. I only looked back once and didn't see him follow, but I did notice the door to the other unit was wide open. I got to the end of the road and called for help. When police got there, they could hear from outside that same eerie tune being whistled from inside. They approached carefully, going down to the living room and finding the man in the exact same position. They said he turned his head slightly to look at them, giving a short, crooked smile, then dropping his gun and letting them arrest him. He basically spoke nothing of what he was doing or had planned to do, or why he was there. Some of the officers I talked to thought he might have been trying to get arrested for some reason. But strangely, there's no information on the guy. No matching fingerprints or identification of any kind. And without him being cooperative, they had no way to find out who he really was, or if he had any kind of mental illness that could be behind all of it. I don't know what other ways that night could have gone down, but even thinking about other possibilities makes me uneasy. Every once in a while, though, I still hear that same eerie tune being whistled in the middle of my dreams, making me wake up in a panic, thinking he could be back. I was 16. I lived in a small home with my parents at the time, sort of on the outskirts of the city. It was in a smaller, wooded neighborhood, about an hour outside of the main city area where both of my parents worked. This was on a regular weekday. It was pretty cloudy and rainy all day, and everyone was talking about this big storm that was supposedly rolling in later tonight. I didn't care too much, so long as I didn't have to walk home in it. Thankfully, it waited until school was out, and for me to get home before the rain started picking up. Usually these storms are over-exaggerated, but as I watched TV in the living room with the windows open, the clouds got darker and darker, and then the rain got a lot worse. But honestly, the most unsettling thing was the wind. Our small, old, and basically wooden house was creaking and swaying as the wind slammed against it, and rain crashed against the roof. Regardless, I was sure everything was good and kind of just listened to the storm as I watched TV and waited for my parents to get home. At about 5:30 though, my phone alarm suddenly screamed at me about a flash flood warning. Not too much later, my mom called. She said a bunch of the roads on the way home were apparently flooded over, and that it was too dangerous for them to drive in, so they'd have to wait it out. I said I was good here, and the house seemed to be holding up, so it wasn't a big deal. Now knowing that my parents were stuck in the city, I got up and found something to eat in the kitchen. As I waited for my meal to heat up in the microwave, I thought I heard something that sounded like a knock, like something knocking on wood. It was so muffled by all the rain and wind that it was hard to tell, and I thought if it was anything, it was probably just something the wind was smacking against the house, so I ignored it. I grabbed my food and moved back over to the couch to watch TV. But before I could even start eating, I heard it again. This time, it kind of freaked me out because it sounded like it was at the front door, which was pretty much right next to me. And it was the exact same knocking pattern as the one I thought I'd heard when I was in the kitchen. Obviously, this made me think it had to be a person, but outside, in this storm, that really didn't make any sense. I was too scared for a minute to even check out the door, so I kinda just sat frozen on the couch and waited for something to happen. But when nothing did, I finally got up and went over to check out the door. I walked up to the door and looked out the peephole. It was mostly fogged over. All I could see were the blurry shapes of heavy rain pouring down. I looked out there for a while, making sure I didn't see any figures move or something. But with no signs of anything, I felt safe opening the door. At first, I was relieved. Nobody was there. It was just the monstrous storm outside. But then I noticed something weird. In the mud coming up to the porch, there were footsteps. I couldn't actually make out the shoe print or anything, but it was clear by the repeating pattern through the mud that they were definitely footsteps. And given the weather, they had to be recent to not have been washed away already. I felt a chill run through my body before I abruptly closed the door. I was really freaked out and really didn't know what to do. The rational side of me wanted to call my parents, or maybe even the police, because this was really strange with the massive storm going on and for me being alone. But the other side of me didn't want to worry anyone over something that was hopefully nothing. I mean, they weren't on the porch, so they must have already left. At least that was my thought process. I stayed more alert, but refrained from calling anyone yet. I told myself if I saw or heard anything else, though, I'd call. I went back to the couch and ate my dinner, keeping the TV volume a bit lower so I could listen to the storm. Honestly, I don't remember much else from that part of the night, because at some point I just laid down and passed out, waiting for my parents to get home. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't sure why I'd woken up, but the whole house was dark, and the storm was just as loud as it was earlier. I knew a while had passed though, and I was curious how I'd been able to sleep so long without my parents coming home and waking me up. I picked up my phone and checked the time, but immediately saw I had multiple missed calls and unopened texts from my parents. They were just asking if I was okay, and said the roads were still too bad to drive in, and they had to get a hotel in the city for the night. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, not really processing any of the texts I read, and just trying to wake up still. And then I heard probably the most terrifying sound I could have heard in that moment. It was a single footstep on the wooden floor right above me. Not something hitting the house or wind making the house creak. It was unmistakably a footstep inside the house, specifically in my bedroom, which was the room directly above me. My heart started racing as I listened for another few seconds. I followed the sound of the footsteps, staring at the ceiling as they slowly moved through my room. Then they started going toward the door into the upstairs hallway. I knew I had to act fast. I turned my phone on silent and quietly ran into the small downstairs bathroom in the main hallway, keeping the lights off and carefully closing the door behind me and locking it. I don't think they heard me. I opened my phone and turned the brightness on the lowest setting as I called 911. It was pitch black in there, aside from the dim phone screen. Once I saw that the call timer had started, meaning an operator answered, I whispered my name, my address, and what was happening, then went back to staying quiet while keeping the call going. I was afraid to even put my phone on the quietest volume to let me hear the operator, especially as I began hearing the footsteps making their way down the stairs. The low thumps slowly moved through the hallway, rain and wind filling the sound between each step. They walked right past the bathroom door. They kept on until they got to the kitchen, and then a few seconds passed as I waited for the next footstep, and then a few more seconds passed. Before I knew it, I was just waiting for any more sounds or for them to move, but I didn't hear anything. Several long, agonizing minutes passed until a sudden bang at the front door sounded and police called out. I ran out of the bathroom and opened the door, but it was apparent by the lack of any other sounds inside the house that the intruder was gone. The sliding back door was cracked open, leaving the eerie evidence of their absence. Likely, the sound of them breaking inside was drowned out by the heavy storm, keeping me asleep. However, that could actually be the reason that I'm still here today. Whoever the intruder was seemed to only go through the hallway, upstairs, and into my bedroom, so me staying asleep on the couch and not making myself known was probably for the best. Disturbingly though, it seems clear that they were looking for me. What's really unnerving to think about, even today, years later, is that I never saw the person, so I literally know nothing about them, whether they're a man or woman, teenager or adult, someone I knew, or someone I didn't know, or worse, someone that I didn't know, but that knew me. Me and my parents have been pretty on edge for the last few years, hoping whoever it was doesn't attempt to come back to continue whatever they had planned for that night. I live alone in a pretty quiet, cozy neighborhood in a suburban town outside of a small city. I'd been there for several years and really had no issues with it. I knew most of my neighbors and felt like our town was just really quiet and calm. Nothing much ever happened, and I was able to just live my life in peace. This was in the middle of spring. I'd gotten out of work after a long 12-hour shift, driving home in the dark around 9 p.m. The roads were empty and the neighborhood was still and dark, as most people had been hunkered down inside from the pouring rain for the past several days now. I pulled into my home and went inside, warming up some leftovers in the oven and resting on the couch as I settled in for the night. Only 10-ish minutes after I'd gotten home, though, there was a rather loud knock at the front door. I was really put off by it, unsure who it could be or what it could be for, but I got up and saw a man standing on my porch. He had a black rain jacket on and looked drenched. I opened the door. "Can I help you with something?" The man looked at me for a moment. His eyes were droopy, like he was very tired, and his face was stiff and motionless. He looked a bit older than me, maybe in his early 30s, with a dark beard and longish brown hair, soaked by the rain. Finally, he answered, speaking slowly and without much emotion, explaining that his dog jumped his fence and he wanted to know if I'd seen it. I said no, that I haven't seen anything. He nodded in an understanding way, but his eyes wandered past me and into my house as he slowly turned away and walked off the porch. I closed the door. I thought the guy was kinda weird, but maybe he was just really tired and frustrated, especially with all this happening at night and in rainy weather. I hoped he'd find his dog soon though, and aside from that, I went back to the couch and forgot about it. I want to say I was sitting there, watching TV for maybe 15 minutes, before there was a sudden knock at the front door again. Immediately, I was sure it was the same guy, but I had no idea why he'd come back. I got up, very confused, and sort of concerned as well. Sure enough, when I looked out, I saw the same guy standing behind the door. I opened it, and this time I wasn't quite as friendly, just straight up asking him what he wanted. He had that same cold look as before. The man pointed toward the side of my house and said he saw his dog run into my backyard and asked if he could go look around back there. The way he said it was kind of strange though. I'm not sure how to explain it, but yeah, something was clearly not right. to get him off my back, and in case he was telling the truth, I said sure, he could go back there and look around. He said thank you, but at the same time as I was starting to close the door, he took a step forward, almost like he thought I was going to let him inside to lead him through the house to my back door. I just continued closing the door though. I'm not sure why he would have thought that, when he could easily just walk around the house and to my backyard. I looked out to make sure he left, and he did, going around to the side of my house. After all of that though, I wasn't too comfortable with the guy just wandering around, so I went to the kitchen where I could watch out the back door. I didn't stare at him through the door or anything, but I cleaned up some stuff on the counters, while occasionally looking back at what he was up to. Every time I looked, it seemed like he was just walking around the perimeter of the yard. Until one time I looked back, and his face was right behind the glass, looking in at me. It literally made me jump. I yelled through the glass, asking what he wanted. He called out, asking if his dog was inside my house. What the hell was wrong with this guy? I sternly said no, clearly showing that I was getting impatient with him. But the man kept asking, wanting me to let him in the house to look around for his dog. He'd bang on the door every time I wouldn't answer. I could see it in his face that he was getting unnervingly angry at the fact that I wouldn't let him in. It was getting kind of horrifying. As he kept hitting the door and yelling at me, I called the police. Only then, once he saw me take my phone out, did he finally stop and leave, which only made it more suspicious as to what he was truly up to. Police came and took a report from me of what happened and what he looked like and all that sort of stuff. But that's where it was left at. There wasn't much they could do right then and there. However, unfortunately, a week later, there was an incident really similar to mine. It's unclear if he forced his way in or was just allowed inside by the victims, but the story was almost exactly the same as what happened to me. A man came knocking on their door, looking for his dog, only for it to take an awful turn. It makes me even more disturbed by that night the man came by my place, doing the same thing. Had I listened to him, or been any more willing to help, I could have suffered a similar fate to the others.
This happened 2 years ago, and since the anniversary just passed, I thought I should finally share the story. My fiance and I were on the second night of our 2-night camping trip at a popular campground, about a half hour from where we live. For reference, my fiance is a person of color, and we live in a predominantly white, conservative, and racist area. This is important later. On our first night, we kept hearing noises in the woods around us. The campsite right beside ours to the right was occupied, but the one to the left was not. The campsites are about 150 yards apart, and we had camped here in the same exact plot the year before. Needless to say, we were familiar with the area and the various kinds of animals that live in the woods. The first night, we heard shuffling around our tent. It was obviously something large moving around. We brushed it off and assumed it was just a deer. Now back to the main event. On August 11th, we spent the day at the battlefields a town over with my family. They had all been invited to join us for the day by my fiance as a surprise for me while he proposed to me. We stayed with my family into the evening, about 6 p.m., before heading back to our campsite. When we got back, things were really odd. Someone had obviously been in our tent. Our blankets were thrown around, clothes were on the floor, and my backpack had been rearranged, and I was missing underwear. But hey, we were stupid 19-year-olds and decided that since whoever had busted in had left and hadn't taken anything important, it was fine and that they probably wouldn't come back. So we set up a campfire and sat out until it was dark, roasting hot dogs and s'mores, smoking cigarettes, and celebrating our engagement. Around 9:30 p.m., we put our fire out and decided to go into our tent for the night to celebrate a little bit more. Nothing too loud or obnoxious. Immediately after we finished, we started to hear the noises outside of our tent again, but this time we focused in. We heard clear footsteps and at one point a man whispering. We looked at each other and our eyes got wide. Somebody was definitely walking around outside our tent, We were still and completely silent, just listening to the footsteps. And we heard whispering again. Shit, make that 2 men walking around our tent. As if we had the ability to read minds, my fiance said, "I have to go to the bathroom," and I agreed. The bathroom was up the hill from our site. Most people who were in lower sites like ours drove their cars up to the bathroom. Now here's the part I still get chills thinking about. We got up and we were getting dressed. My fiance had just turned on the light in our tent and put his binder on when a man spoke directly to us from right outside the tent. "What are you doing?" I can't even describe how malicious and menacing this voice sounded. It was clearly directed at us, and he said it with a snicker. He was watching us through the walls of the tent. Again, for this part, we were stupid 19-year-olds, so we decided to just run for it to the car. My fiancé grabbed his pocket knife and his keys and stepped out of the tent. He pulled me with him, and we ran like hell to the car. I heard the footsteps running behind us, and then turning and running up to another campsite. In the bathroom, we talked over our options. We talked about sleeping in the car or driving into town. Then we had another idea. We drove back down to our campsite and began packing everything in the car. At this point, it was around midnight. We moved faster than I think either of us thought possible, wrapping up the tent with our belongings still in it and grabbing our folding chairs. We were all packed in like 5 minutes and hopped back in the car to leave. I jumped out at the end of the drive and grabbed our nameplate, which had my full name on it, by the way, off of the post. As we pulled out of the campsite, I saw our assailants for the first time. Stalking through the woods onto our campsite were 2 tall white men. I realized that these were the same men who had been driving past our campsite the whole time we were there, just glaring at us and muttering to each other. One was wearing camo hunting gear, and the other was wearing a Confederate flag tank top. Both were carrying large hunting knives, unsheathed and at the ready. They turned when they saw our car driving away, and one started to chase us until the other stopped him. I made eye contact with the man in camo, and he smiled the most terrifyingly evil smile at me and shook his head slowly. We drove the long way home, taking all the weirdest, hardest to follow roads, and called my dad so he would know we were coming. When we got home, we told my dad everything, and he shrugged it off as us just being paranoid. So I never told anyone else besides all of you now. I'm convinced to this day that this was going to be a racially motivated attack. The campground was not heavily populated, and my fiancé was the only non-white person at any of the campsites. It was no accident that the 2 men who had been shadowing us since our arrival and wore Confederate flags, and one on their truck, decided to target the interracial couple. I still get cold chills when I think about how close we were to being killed or seriously hurt that night. Just how lucky we were that our reckless plan to just make a run for it worked. So, to those men who stalked our campsite with knives, that's not me. So when I was 13, my parents sent me to an all-girls fitness camp to work on becoming the best version of me. Well, let's be honest here, it was a fat camp, and it was as horrible as you can imagine. Bad food, all-day exercise, and god-awful counselors. The camp took place on a college campus where they had us sleeping in dorms of 2 girls per room. But I had high hopes that it wouldn't be a complete waste of a summer. As my roommate seemed like a great girl, let's call her Mary. We had similar interests and the same style. It seemed like a perfect match. We would chat late into the night, planning our escape from the camp, bemoaning having to give up our cell phones, though secretly I had managed to sneak mine in, and talking about our families and how much they sucked for sending us here. To be honest, I was surprised that she was even at this camp. She was actually pretty fit, and her parents had signed her up for the whole summer, versus mine only sending me for 2 weeks. Only 2 days into being at this place, I was pulled aside by another girl who I had become close friends with. She warned me that Mary had a lot of issues, and the reason why she had been sleeping alone for X amount of time was because no one else wanted to room with her. Well, I brushed it off, thinking it was just rumors and the other girls being mean. That day at lunch, Mary seemed rather mad at me, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why. So when I got a chance, I asked her what was up. She ranted at me about how everyone was so mean, and was I going to leave too? She went on to explain how this one girl she was rooming with switched rooms because she made friends with this popular girl, and that she made up lies to be popular. And silly me, I believed her. We continued hanging out, and only now do I realize how she was keeping me from hanging out with everyone else. Near the end of my first week, the camp took us on a long walk over to the local pool. It was a big deal as it was super hot and only a once-a-week activity. Mary and I were super excited to go. When we got there, we quickly claimed some chairs and left our stuff there. As Mary had been at the camp for several months, she didn't have to pass some stupid can you swim test that I assume is mandatory in most camp settings. So we were separated for about 20 minutes. After I passed with flying colors, thank you to the swim team, I jumped into the pool and just started floating around. I heard her calling my name and saw her waving me over to the deep end of the pool. I swam over and asked her what was up, and she said she wanted to show me something. Next thing I know, her hands are around my neck and she is shoving me underwater. Now, I am a good swimmer and I am very capable of holding my breath for quite a long time, but never in my life had anything like this happen to me. And I panicked and opened my mouth to scream. Luckily, before my mind had even processed what was happening, I had kicked up my legs and shoved her back and made a desperate escape. Somehow I managed to swim away and pull myself out of the pool. As I caught my breath and began to process what had just happened, I looked back at her. She was just staring at me, not having moved. I quickly grabbed my stuff and ran into the bathroom and called my mom. I was in tears as I explained what happened, and it was very obvious she didn't believe me. I stayed in that bathroom until we left to go back to the camp. I didn't leave the counselor's side the entire walk back. When we arrived back at the camp, I was pulled aside by one of the women in charge. She very rudely demanded I give her my cell phone. I, of course, denied having one and asked why she thought I did. She told me that my parents had called about some assault that had happened to me, and they told them I had called. Quickly, I excused it, saying I had borrowed a phone from a lady at the pool. Thankfully, they bought it. They told me that I would be moved to a new room the next day and that I had to spend the night with Mary one last time. Furiously, I begged them to please let me sleep on the floor of another girl's room, but they insisted I was being melodramatic. As soon as I was left alone again, I raced to the closest bathroom and called my mom. That's when I learned the truth about Mary. I wasn't her second roommate, not her third, fourth, or fifth. I was the sixth girl to stay in a room with her. 3 of her roommates had left camp early, and the other 2 had switched rooms at the first opportunity. All 5 other girls had made allegations of violence from Mary against them, but the camp refused to do anything and insisted she was just being a troubled girl who wanted to make new friends. Or, as they told my parents, well, she has had some issues in the past. That night, I didn't sleep at all, and neither did Mary. She sat up in bed staring at me all day and night. I could feel her watching me, and I was just terrified. I had my phone clutched in my hand with 911 dialed and ready to call at any moment. I practically cried when the sun came up. That day, I was moved to a new room in a different building and somehow managed to break my foot in the process, so my parents drove up and took me home with a cast on my foot to commemorate my time there. To this day, I have had issues from what this girl did to me, and I have never been able to live with roommates or make friends as easily. So, Mary, wherever you are out there, let's never meet again. I have been camping, solo backpacking, and hunting my whole life in Oregon, and I have felt comfortable in the woods and have a deep respect for nature. A few years ago, my wife, daughter, and 2 German Shepherds went camping north of Mount Jefferson, Oregon. I have included the coordinates of our campsite, which we found to be the perfect setup for us and our 2 dogs, who need the privacy since they are intimidating to other dog owners and can be loud when spooked. It was not an established campsite, just a nice horseshoe off a USFS road that had flat ground, full trees, and a fire pit. The first night my daughter wanted to sleep by herself in a 2-man tent right next to ours. It was maybe 2 feet away from me and my wife's tent. We made the male German Shepherd sleep, Guts is his name, with her in the tent. That whole first night, neither my wife nor I could sleep. We both heard footsteps and they were heavy, not like typical forest critters scampering around at night. I was well armed because I was paranoid from reading recently, before departing, about a dad in California who was shot and killed in a tent next to his 2 infant daughters. Needless to say, both my wife and I had 2 pistols, and I had my rifle with me. The dogs are great at detection, and that is why I felt my daughter could sleep alone, because Guts is completely fearless, and nothing would lay a hand on her without a battle to the death. All in all, nothing but bad vibes, and loud footsteps occurred that night, which I ultimately decided were deer or maybe some elk. Day 2. Morning. We go for a walk down the road, and maybe 300 feet away, I see an abandoned road where a rusted gatepost, the gate was missing, was covered in vegetation. Something of a blue color caught my eye, and Guts immediately took off running down this abandoned road. My heart began to race because I thought it was another family camping like us, and he was going to get himself shot, or scare some innocent people to death. So I chased after him as fast as I could, and the rest followed. He stops 20 feet into the road, and I yell his name, but I have covered just enough distance to see that there is nobody there. Something is off about the sight. I yell out, "Hello? Is anyone out there? Sorry about the dog." I got no response. My curiosity gets the best of me, and I have to see what the site conditions are. As I get closer, I know something is wrong. It had all the necessities for a campsite, including a cooler, propane burner, tent, blankets, and folding table. But every single item had been completely destroyed, smashed, and torn from what appeared to be claw marks. We all walked around in circles, puzzled why anyone would leave all their camping gear behind, including an expensive REI tent. I figured someone left in a hurry and animals got to the rest as the only logical explanation. Still, the propane tank and cooler were flattened by something, and it certainly wasn't snowpack with tree coverage in that spot. As the afternoon rolls in, I and my daughter are playing bocce ball at the campsite, and my wife goes walking maybe 70 feet north to do her business. I do not have a direct line of sight on her. All of a sudden, I see Guts make a mad dash straight towards her. Normally, he would always be with me unless he was called over, and she didn't call for him. His speed and focus caught my attention, and I knew something weird was happening, so I ran over there, and my wife started jogging at me, and I immediately drew my pistol. Guts has completely continued running into the forest another 100 feet. Before I call him and he stops. My other dog, Leah, who never misses the opportunity to be the pack leader, is not taking point. I've had her now for 7 years, and this was the first time in her life she refused to leave my daughter's side. She was full-haired and attached to us at the hip. Again, anytime we hike or play, Leah is up front bossing everything in her path and pauses to look to see where we are and continues. I asked my wife what happened, and she said, "I was trying to pee, and all of a sudden, I felt all my hairs raise. I knew somebody was watching me. And then I saw Guts running towards me, and I just got up to move towards you. We spent 10 minutes looking for signs of anything and saw no trails, broken branches, or anything to point to what and where something went. We decided we were spending one more night since it's too late to pack up and drive, but we will all be in the big tent together. Before we go to bed, I put a rope with a makeshift coin alarm around the perimeter of our campsite. I used a mint can and some coins and keys from our truck and zip-tied it, so anything hitting the rope gave a little jingle. Very unsophisticated, but it put my wife at ease. As I go to tie my last corner off at a tree near our tent, our third mystery item unveils itself. It looks like someone has done the same exact thing I've done with the rope that was so old and brown I didn't see it at first. It was broken and only a few pieces remained, but sure enough, it was tied at roughly the same height, 8 to 10 inches off the ground, and even had a few rusted washers on it. I immediately felt someone had stayed here before and put the same kind of makeshift warning system on the same tree that I am right now, 10 to 15 years ago, based on the condition of the rope. Perhaps my paranoia has now reached a new height, but I had to make sure the girls felt safe. And at the time, the only thing I could think of was when the evening came around, I made them sit in the truck and I fired a clip of my .45 into the dirt as a signal to whatever was out there that we were armed. I reassured the girls that anybody listening to that now knows we have 2 wolves and are armed, and we are too risky of a target, so we can sleep safely. That night, we heard no footsteps, and the dogs never perked up and barked. We left early the next morning. Fast forward to today, and I watched the Amazon Missing 411 Haunted documentary, and I noticed the clusters smack dab close to where we camped that weekend. And a flood of dread rushes me as I think of that mysterious abandoned campsite with the ripped tent and smashed cooler and cooktop. We have been camping since then and have enjoyed the beauty of the Northwest, but there was something there at that place that possibly took or harmed someone else less than 300 feet away from where we camped. And we all thank our lucky stars. Guts was doing his thing so well that afternoon. Now this is something I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally, we'd see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the grounds from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad. Till the last time I had gone exploring. When I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part of a mental hospital, which is kind of a weird combination, I know. But it closed down to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened, and most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, and it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play place and park area with the flashlights that we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos and wood chips from the previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys thrown about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, till all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room, and I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were in a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested that we go to look and see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of that idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up to the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became stronger. With a hint of something else, which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment, we walked in. Our flashlights pointed in every direction with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and to the right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian lit his flashlight into a room. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here, but it seems fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back, I think he was being completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking towards the sounds. We'd consider turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or someone was in the building, but we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched, when finally we entered a room on the right which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian lit his flashlight to the corner of the room, where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assumed was blood, and torn beige pants. He did not have any socks on and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the feast?" he asked. This kicked us over the edge, and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It actually took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it. And just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, with his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. We sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that he used to go to the psych ward before it was closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sicknesses from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food once, but nothing has been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful, especially in dangerous areas like abandoned buildings. The house I live in is only a couple 100 meters away from a small church in a suburb. Although I was brought up as a Christian, I was never really that religious, and I only went to said church whenever my parents took me as a kid. My dad died when I was a teenager, and we stopped going as a family altogether. After that, I only went whenever my friends asked me to tag along. Now I'm 21, and I only pass by the church whenever I have to go into the city, because there's a dirt road beside it that leads to the parking lot behind, adjacent to a major road, where it was easy to get on a bus to work. It was closer than the village gate in the opposite direction, and I only had to ride one bus from there. I'm not an easily scared man, nor have I previously experienced lasting trauma after being scared. And I'm here to tell you that what I saw beside that church 3 months ago still haunts me to my core. A storm was announced to hit earlier that week, but leaving for work that early Thursday morning, the skies were clear. Not a single cloud to cover the starry sky, so I didn't bring an umbrella. I climbed over the parking lot gate because it was chained shut until 6 for the first mass. The guard at the outpost didn't mind because the church staff knew my family pretty well. I work at a hotel as a line cook, and it's a very demanding job. I have to leave home before the sunrise, and most days I work long after it is set. The only time I get to see the sun is if I'm assigned to a station at the buffet, where we have a view to the poolside. It was an average overwork and underpaid kind of day for me. I wasn't assigned at the buffet line. I stayed in the kitchen where there weren't any windows, so I was surprised to see the flooded streets when I clocked out. Apparently it had been raining heavily all afternoon, and it subsided around sunset. It was around 8 in the evening when I left the hotel, and in my country, flooded streets meant standstill traffic for at least a couple of hours. This wasn't that uncommon. I had dealt with similar situations before. It also meant I could sleep on the bus, so it wasn't that upsetting. Fast forward to around midnight, and it's pouring out again. I'm not too far off from the church parking lot, so I decide to get off the bus and start walking, because it had not budged for the last 10 minutes. I put my phone and wallet in my waterproof backpack, which also contained a spare shirt, my house key, and my knife set. I didn't mind getting wet. Around this time, the parking lot gate was already chained shut, but I climbed over it like I usually do. It was flooded knee-deep in the parking lot, and there was no security guard at the outpost. I figured he retreated into the church. It was really dark, but I focused on the small amount of light coming from the houses in the distance. They really only looked like dots from that far. I trudged my way through the open parking lot that could have passed as a kiddie pool when I hear this strange sloshing at the far corner to my left. Due to the heavy rain, I couldn't clearly make out what was there, but I knew that I wasn't alone. All the lights to the lot were shut, and the only things to guide me were the few lights of the houses far ahead, and my memory of the area's landscape. It's a straight shot from a dirt road, so I didn't have to worry about a light source. The sound of all the falling raindrops accumulated into a dull static noise, so it was easy for me to hear that there was something going on in that corner. I could see the shape of a person who seemed to be sitting down, so I could only see from the waist up. As I got closer and my eyes better adjusted to the dark, I could tell that it was a woman because of her long hair and curvy outline. She was flailing her arms and splashing the water around, grunting as she pounded her fists into the water. She was about 2 cars lengths away, so I wasn't that concerned about it. I've dealt with crazy people before. I glanced over a few times as I passed her, and then I got to the dirt road. Quite unnerving. She was out of my line of sight at this point, and the mud made it hard to walk. Water was only ankle deep now, but I kept having to jerk my foot free after each step because my shoes would sink in the mud. A small splash made me look over my shoulder, and in the darkness of that dirt road, the woman was splayed out face first in the shallow water. I froze, thinking whether or not I should help her. I truly hated the thought of being the guy who let someone drown in water 6 inches deep. She was about 10 steps away from me, and before I could decide what to do, she started to move. It was too dark to see any details, but her outline was distinguishable enough for me to see that she was looking up at me. She slowly got on her hands and feet like she was about to stand, but her hands lingered on the ground. I was already scared pale at this point. My legs didn't work and I thought of reaching out for my knives, but I was afraid to move. And then she starts crawling toward me on her hands and feet. This sent a jolt through me, and all of a sudden I'm sprinting toward my house. I could hear the splashes behind me along with her coarse breathing, almost like she was coughing. My eyes started filling with tears, and the rain against my face made the light in the distant houses blurry, but I knew that at that point I was running for my life. I couldn't tell if she was catching up, but I didn't have it in me to look back. I heard her yell in a voice so rough it resembled a pig squeal. Short, sharp, and loud. A wordless shout of anger. I believe that was the fastest I ever ran in my life. At this point, I couldn't hear anything but the rain. Deafening, unrelenting, and violent. My house was close. I sped by a few houses with their dim porch lights, and I could tell that I was running on asphalt. I didn't know when it happened, but apparently I lost my shoes back at the dirt road. One last bend and I was at my doorstep finally. I forcefully tore my backpack zipper open and I fumbled around the inside for the key, frantically looking around to see if she was still chasing me. I got in the house and slammed the door shut and collapsed. I don't recall the rest of that night, but when I woke up the next morning in my bed, my older brother filled me in. He was awake when I got home that night and went to the front door when the noise alerted him. He said I was on my knees, leaning against the door, and quietly sobbing to myself. He woke my mom and they were trying to console me, but I wouldn't talk. They tried to ask me questions, but I would just shake my head. They got me into some dry clothes and led me to my bed. Over breakfast, I explained what happened and my mom said she'd notify the village guards. I could tell that they were concerned for my safety, but they didn't understand the fear I felt. My brother even joked about it. I didn't go to work that day, and in fact I took the rest of the week off because I caught a fever. The guards did a minor investigation and even increased patrol for a while, but they didn't find anything except for my shoes in the parking lot. I can't walk alone anymore without glancing over my shoulder every 5 seconds. Sudden loud noises make my heart jump, and I can't even stand the sound of rain. I've been getting better though. I can sleep with the lights off now. I just wish I would stop seeing the crawling woman's shape when I start drifting off to sleep. I wish I could tell you more about her, I honestly do. Because it's one thing to be afraid of something, but when you lack the understanding of what you fear, your mind fills in the blanks with terrifying detail. I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting uni. Our home was, and still is, just outside of a small town with forests all around. There was also a small man-made lake, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and ramified into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home, there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forest there quite well, and I knew where I could cut through the dense trees to meet the stream. The walk that I would go on always led me off the path, which turned northwest slowly, so away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn to the west after a few miles walk, at which point the stream was hidden quite deep into the forest. I'd continue to walk north and follow the stream through the forest to get to the river, then follow the river west to get to the lake. It's honestly pretty easy to get lost in this forest, because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water. It goes up and down and you end up completely surrounded by trees. But I've spent many days wandering around there, alone or even with my dad, over the span of 18 years, and I never saw anyone else in that forest. I went there twice this summer, both times alone. The first time I left in the morning, I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend, then I cut back into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running my hands in the water, I heard a bell from far away, coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened, wondered if it was a lost hunting dog, and I started moving towards the sound. But I soon realized it couldn't have been an animal. I could tell the bell was too heavy because of how clear the sound was to be on a collar. I kept moving and the bell was moving away from me, and it stopped completely after 5 minutes. The stream also wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell that could have been enclosed in a tent or something, and the river was too far still. I thought of everything, but nothing explained the sound, apart from one obvious thing, which I just didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. I knew it had to have been a person, but I stopped thinking about it and I just walked on normally. Until I found a badger, a bloomin' dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It was fairly fresh. The body was still limp and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots, but I knew that was something that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream, so had I. So the badger was put there, maybe killed there, at least decapitated, while I was walking that way, I suppose. I don't know really. But nothing else happened that day. 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer and the last time ever. I left home at around 6 p.m. and I made it to the stream, then walked to the river in an hour. Then I decided to go back the way I came because it was getting late and it was raining quite heavily. The sun set at around 9 p.m. I was walking as fast as I could, with the sound of the rain in the trees being really surreal and loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while, through the clearest and most open part of the forest, when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with his head strung to the front of his paws, and it was tied up, just swinging from a tree. It was this putrid bag of stench, wet and dripping green liquid. I started gagging. I had some sort of mucus-textured fluid in my hair. It was just repulsive. At first, I just stared at it. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in its juices. I was soaking from the rain. My senses became confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me when I realized that I walked the same way to get to the river, so someone had strung up the body after I passed it on the way there. Someone knew that I would see it, so was someone watching me and running around the forest, where the faint sounds of branches breaking around me, not animals. I looked around and started jogging. I was half running, half walking away from the stream, back towards the path for a while, when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad while running. I told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turns west. It was the closest part of the path to me, and I told him to go as fast as he could and that someone was in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was just like I shit out my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raise despite being soaked. It was dark and I jogged as fast as I could. I was panicking because the path was still a bit far away, just too far to feel safe. It was still raining. Every single sound was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for way longer than last time, on and off, and I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I couldn't flip and breathe properly was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I knew I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a damn horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud, like a toddler does, tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. But I stayed on the phone with my mom, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mom was also screaming on the phone at the same time that they were on the path and that I needed to run fast. I was as terrified as you could imagine, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half running, half speed walking thing again because I was out of breath. But then I heard branches break and clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest, and the bell ringing louder. I didn't want to, but I looked over my shoulder. That's when I saw what was in the forest with me. A tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. Now, I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I didn't look back once. I screamed as much as I could. I lied even. I'm on the phone with the police. They're on the path. Dad, I can see you. I'm here. I wanted to yell, Dad, please, where are you? But I kept that part to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen, and I felt like the man was right behind me. I just kept telling myself to not look back. I was gasping and wheezing and crying so hard and screaming for my dad. I even dropped my bag and only realized I didn't have it anymore when I was in the car. I felt like my phone was my only way home. Things no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears and the bell. I finally heard my dad shout my name, and I knew he was coming my way, that he could see me because of the intonation of his voice. I pretty much lunged myself at him when we got to each other, and my dad heard the bell too. My mom could hear it on the phone as she was waiting with the car ready to leave fast. This happened back while I was in college a couple of years ago. I and my roommate moved into a beautiful apartment our junior year of college. Our parents made it extremely clear that two small females living alone together was not ideal for some of the cheaper, shady neighborhoods close to our college. We attended a college in our state capital, so we were in a city environment and had certain criteria we had to meet in order for us to live there and for them to co-sign our lease. Lit sidewalks, keyed entry into the apartment building, lit parking lot, X amount of blocks from campus, etc. So we finally found one that fit our parents' criteria. Our apartment building had a keyed entry for both the front of the building and the back gate that led to the fire escape. Our apartment was an end unit that led to the fire escape, so there were 2 deadbolt locks on it. We loved our apartment. We felt safe, we had fun, truly living the college experience. And then my roommate's boyfriend starts slowly moving his things into the apartment. He's staying there way more often than he should. Finally tell my roommate if he wants to stay there and use the water, electric and food that I help pay for, then he needs to pay for it too, including our rent. I tell her a 3-way split, or I'm paying only my rent and he can pay the entire electric, water, and trash bill. I think I'm being pretty fair, and even though her boyfriend doesn't have a job, that's not my problem. I work and go to college. Your "I don't want to work at McDonald's," yes, he actually said that excuse is completely garbage. You want a place to stay, then to the Golden Arches you shall go. So instead, my roommate starts sneaking him in really late at night after I go to sleep, and he leaves on days I'm home. While I'm in class, he's there, then leaves before I come back. My schedule is extremely routine. Well, he can't have a key, so if my roommate is in class or at work, how is he getting in? He can't take my roommate's key because if he decides to leave halfway through the day, how will she get her key back? All good questions. The solution they come up with is to leave the back door unlocked that leads to the fire escape, and then he can just jump the fence at the bottom of the fire escape to get back on the fire escape when he's ready to come back. Or stick a rock in between the door. Whatever works for him. So I'm off of work and school one Thursday morning, and I decide I'm going to sleep in as long as I possibly can. My roommate and her boyfriend have already left for the day, so naturally they leave the door unlocked. I'm asleep like a pretty princess. It's about 10 in the morning when I hear the back door open to the apartment. I come to just enough to recognize the noise, realize it's my roommate or her boyfriend, and I brush it off and try to drift back off. All of a sudden, I start hearing someone creep through the apartment. Wooden floors. It definitely doesn't sound like casual walking. It is clearly someone stepping slowly and quietly through the apartment. My door to my room is ajar, just a sliver, but I don't see anything out the door, and I'm honestly too tired to go get up and look. A couple of minutes pass, and I figure that my roommate and her boyfriend are just being weirdos, and I fall back asleep. I can't be sure how much time passes before I open my eyes, but it can't be too long. I wake up to my door opening. My back is to the door, and I am facing the opposing wall. I slowly start to turn over to see why my roommate or her boyfriend would dare wake me from my slumber. And there he is. A burglar, in my room, next to the bed I'm currently lying in. A 6-foot-tall, 250-pound minimum burglar, unplugging my TV about 5 feet from where I currently am. I immediately pretended I was just shifting positions in my sleep and continued to roll over with my eyes as shut as I could make them seem. Still open enough to watch what was going on. He hears me shuffling as I turn over, stops, looks dead at me, and luckily doesn't realize that my eyes are open just a tiny bit. He goes back to unplugging my TV and my DVD player, shoves them in a bag he's brought, like those bags from IKEA, and steals my change jar and casually starts walking out the front door to my apartment, like he came in for a cup of tea or something. After I hear the door shut, I immediately spring out of bed, grab my phone and start dialing 911, all while locking the back and front doors. The dispatcher is trying to calm me down. At this point, I am hysterical. I can't even catch my breath to tell her I'm okay. Luckily, I told her my address before I started hyperventilating. Pause. I will take a second to commend the police department, both city and college, because they were there in less than 3 minutes. Resume. She tells me the cops are there, but they need me to go downstairs to let them in the building, because they don't have the key to the front door of the building. I'm so afraid to open the door to my apartment and even look down the hallway. I'm about to walk to the front door and extend my arm out to the handle when I hear, "Ma'am, it's the police," as if I didn't get scared enough already. They yell through the door. I'm paranoid because the dispatcher just told me they couldn't get in and didn't realize someone probably let them in downstairs. I asked the dispatcher to confirm that the people at my door are actually police officers. She tells me that they are at my door. Okay, cool. I open the front door and I collapse right there. My legs completely turn into jello and I just hit the floor. I blacked out for a brief period of time, but they helped me up and sat me down on the couch. There are at least 10 officers in my apartment from both the city and college departments. When I look outside the living room window at the street below, there are 5 or 6 cop cars blocking the street. I later found out they were doing a perimeter search around the immediate area. I'm being bombarded with questions now. I have to find out what's missing, besides the stuff from my room. I'm crying and shaking. This is not at all how I saw my day off going. I tell them my roommate left the back door open for her boyfriend. They inspect the back door and blah blah. The next thing I know, my roommate and her boyfriend walk in and they both had the most dumbfounded looks on both of their faces. At this point now, there is a detective talking to me and I'm giving my statement, giving a description of the burglar, the stuff missing, looking at mugshots, etc. I immediately stop talking to the detective, look at the both of them and blurt out, "Somebody robbed us while I was asleep. Came into my room." My roommate looks me dead in the face and says, "Oh my gosh, is any of my stuff gone?" That's really what you're asking right now? If your replaceable shit is missing? 2 officers take her and her boyfriend aside and talk to them while I'm finishing up with the detective. I call my then boyfriend and he comes over to help me pack my stuff to stay over at his house for a couple of days, which turned into staying until my lease at my place ended, around 4 months. After failing to recognize any suspects in a lineup, the cops slowly start leaving. After they all leave, I call my parents to tell them what had happened, gather my things, and head over to my boyfriend's house. My roommate and her boyfriend never once apologized, not for leaving the door unlocked, but just a general "I'm sorry this happened to you" type of apology. They never asked me if I was okay or if I wanted to talk. Nothing. The day my lease ended was the best day of that entire year. I couldn't wait to get away from my roommate, her boyfriend, and that apartment. They never found the guy who robbed me that day. I didn't even care about the materialistic things. He robbed me of my safety and security, and it took a good amount of counseling to get that back. I'm also thankful he didn't try to attack me that morning. My friendship with my roommate was tarnished. I haven't spoken to her since. To this day, I don't sleep with my back to the door, and I always have a knife under my mattress. For background, I'm a 24-year-old woman living in Australia and working at an establishment that caters to an adult audience. One night, as my shift is coming to a close, one of the patrons asks to buy me a drink, which I accept because of employer policy. I talk him up to a couple of expensive drinks for the 2 of us, have a quick conversation, and make my excuses about my shift being over, but he should come back to see me soon. I feel his gaze undressing me in his mind as he licks a splash of his drink from his upper lip. He stands up and, with his creepy grin, asks to walk me to my car. Now, I'm no idiot. I know never to put myself in that position and politely decline and tell him I might see him next time. I walk out past our biggest bouncer and the guy doesn't follow me. Great. Nothing extraordinary. Just standard par for the course of my profession. But sadly, this isn't where our story ends. Oh no, for this creep, it's only just beginning. I'm off for a week after that night, but when I come back into work, I'm told the patron has been coming in every night for the last week asking for me. Says he wants to buy me another drink. Naively, I think, oh great, a bigger pay this week, and get set for my shift. The night rolls on, and who should roll in but our man of the hour, and he asks for me, right? So I saunter over and he buys me a drink. The whole time I'm sitting there with him, he just has this creepy grin on his face. Not like a sexual undressing creep grin. That's just normal. No, this was the kind of grin where he knows something you don't and is very pleased with himself about that fact. So we were talking, and I'm getting him to order himself drinks and trying to upsell him where I can. About half an hour goes by, and I make my excuses to leave so I can try to spread the tips around. but this guy isn't having it. He won't let me leave, and the more I insist, the angrier he gets. He's practically hissy at me by the time I give a look to one of the bouncers, who promptly comes over and diffuses the situation, giving me an opportunity to walk away. Phew, crisis averted. Wrong, because the bouncer doesn't throw him out. It just gives me a buffer, so this guy starts following me around the place, even attempting to walk into an employee-only area, which is where another bouncer finally notices and kicks him out. I finish my shift and walk over to my car. There he is. I shit you not, sitting on the bonnet of my car. How he knew it was my car, I will never know. He wants me to give him a ride and tells me how sexy I look. He's spewing greasy slimeball creep lines at this point, and I'm not interested. I try to give him a hint nicely and decline to give him a ride, but again, he just turns mean and grabs me by my arm, insisting I give him a ride. I tell him to screw off and jam my key into his shoulder as hard as I can. He lets go and I push him with all my might so he falls down. I jump in my car, lock the door, and shove the key in the ignition. He's back up and banging on the window angrily to let him in, and I mean hard. So hard that I think his hands or my window might break. I gun the accelerator and I'm out of there. When I get 5 minutes down the road and I'm sure I'm not being followed, I pull over to the side of the road and call back to work. I tell them what's happened and alert that the other girls need to be careful leaving tonight. As I hang up the phone, I break into tears. Now, this isn't my first rodeo. I've been grabbed before, and the sad truth is, it will probably happen again. But you never get used to it, you know? I eventually compose myself, pull back onto the road, and head home. I cry myself to sleep. The next morning, word has gotten around, and the owner calls me to make sure I'm okay. I assure him I am, but he insists I take some time off in case this creep comes back. He wants to put some distance between us. Makes sense. A week goes by, then 2. He's coming in every night asking about me and being told I quit and don't work there anymore. I lie to get him to stop coming in, but he just keeps coming in and asking, clearly not buying it. Then suddenly, 2.5 weeks in, he stops. Great. I'm really needing money at this point, so I'm happy to be able to go back to work the following week. Time goes on and everything seems to go back to normal. Same old chancers, but the good kind that lead to higher paychecks. If the abusive guy doesn't come back in, I'm happy. I started being forgetful though. I think I leave a door closed when I leave the house, but it's open when I get back. Lights on or off, food left out, things end up in different places than I remember putting them sometimes, moments before. I'm losing it, but it's probably just the stress of everything that's gone down. One of my close friends who works with me reassures me that it's normal after being grabbed like that and it will pass. This keeps up for a month until one day I head out to work, get 15 minutes down the road, and realize I forgot some clothes that I'll need that night at work. I head back home only to find the lights in my room on and the TV visible as on from the outside. I'm really losing it. Good thing I came back, I guess. I head inside, grab my stuff, and make sure to turn the TV off and the light out, and head to the door. Suddenly, I freeze. There, standing blocking the door, is the creep that grabbed me. I'm stunned, jaw dropped on the floor. And after what seems like a lifetime of standing in silence, staring at each other, him smiling that fucking smile, I scream. What? I'm screaming for him to get out and ask him what he's doing here. How he knows where I live, all in one jumbled mouthful of confusion. He just stands there with that smile on his face while I'm loudly freaking out, but stupidly not moving. I start gasping for air in a mixture of panic attack and bewilderment. Then he decides to speak in my wake. The words ooze out of him and leave me chilled. Welcome home, honey. You're back early. A switch goes off in my head. I throw everything I have on me at him and sprint to the back door. I'm out. I leg it faster than I ever have in my life, screaming bloody murder as I go. No one helps. Stupid, apathetic society. I hide in some bushes around the corner, tears running down my face, gasping for air. I check my pocket and my keys are still there, but no phone. Though I threw that at the stalker creep along with everything else. I sneak back to my house, jump in my car, and nope the F out. I head to work, tell them what's happened, and call the cops. The cops head to my house and send others to my work. The stalker guy is gone when they turn up. They search the house, and it turns out he's been living in my crawl space. I'm paranoid that's what all those doors and lights and misplaced things were about. I pack up whatever I can fit in my car while cops are still there. That they'll let me take, and I drive. I haven't been back since. I moved states, knew everything. My boyfriend, who I live with, works as a teacher in a town about 15 minutes away by train. He gets home more or less at the same time every day, give or take an hour or so. I, on the other hand, work from home. In late January of this year, we got into a pretty big fight about something stupid. I can't even remember what it was about now, but it was one of those fights where we didn't speak to each other, text, call, or anything the whole next day. So this afternoon, I was lying in bed getting worked on. It was a Tuesday, and I was pretty sure his last class finished at 1 p.m. on Tuesdays, meaning he'd surely be home at 2:30. But around 1 p.m., I heard the front door open and shut. I thought, I guess he's home an hour early today. It was normal for him to skip his last class every once in a while, so I didn't really think anything of it. In fact, I was mostly mentally preparing for the awkward post-fight, "Hey, how's it going?" conversation. So I continued to lie in bed and do my work and wait for him to come in and change his clothes. The bedroom door was closed, and I had earplugs sort of half in, as I usually do when I'm working, but I could hear the heavy footsteps of him walking around the apartment, as he always does. If we hadn't been mid-fight and I wasn't so preoccupied with the awkwardness of it all, I might have noticed it was strange how slow the footsteps were, or how long he spent walking around the living room. But I was caught up in the dramatics of the fight, and I didn't think about it. I was just lying there, waiting and waiting for him to finally come in. Finally, the bedroom door slowly opened just a few inches. I turned my head towards the door and prepared to give him a sort of awkward, "We've been fighting for 24 hours, smile. But the door didn't move more than a few inches. I looked and saw that it was a woman's hand with red nail polish on the doorknob. Whoever was there slowly closed the door just as they had opened it, without entering the room. I jumped out of bed, ripped out my earplugs, and sort of froze there for a few seconds while thinking rapidly. My first thought, that was not my boyfriend. Then I thought, could that have been his mom? His sister? The landlady? For some reason, I concluded that surely it was his mom or sister, so I opened the bedroom door and walked into the living room. There wasn't anyone there, but the room smelled heavily of women's perfume. Then I came to my senses and realized his mom and sister don't have keys and have never come over before. The landlady has never entered without permission. This was a stranger. I ran back into the bedroom and shut the door, now shaking heavily. There was a balcony connected to the bedroom, so despite the cold January rain, I stood on the balcony and called my boyfriend. He picked up, and I asked him if his mom or sister might have come over unannounced. He told me, "No, don't move, I'm calling the police." The police were there in minutes and searched the whole apartment. Of course, nobody was there by this point. It was weird, though. Nothing was missing from the apartment, despite us keeping a jar full of money right in the entrance. Nothing was even touched. In fact, it seemed like the intruder came straight to the bedroom, saw my legs in the bed, panicked, and left. Plus, you can't open that big wooden front door without a key. For a few days, my boyfriend and I were convinced it was just the landlady being nosy. I began to feel better. Nevertheless, we demanded that the landlady change our locks. When she came to change them with her husband, she made a discovery. There was a square area by the keyhole that had been scratched away with something. The landlady said surely someone used the tools to break into the apartment. Then, a day or two later, my boyfriend told me, "I have to tell you something, but don't freak out." He told me that the orange kitchen scissors were missing. I obviously freaked out. I tore the apartment looking for those scissors. It's been 6 months, and those scissors are gone. So the whole thing is just creepy and weird. A stranger breaks into a nice apartment, but doesn't touch or take anything valuable. Not even the money jar sitting right in the entrance. Takes scissors from the kitchen, goes straight to the bedroom, sees someone in bed, and immediately leaves.